Hi everyone, my name is Peter Singer and I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you all at the SBS D Forum. I want to talk to you about the role of ideas in changing our lives and the world. I'll start by taking you back 50 years to a formative period in my life. I was a graduate student in Oxford studying philosophy. This is what I looked like then. As you can see, I looked like a hippie. I had long hair, a beard and moustache. I had the kind of glasses that John Lennon wore. They were the cheapest that you could get from the British National Health Service. And I was wearing a heavy coat that I had bought from a store selling old army clothing. My political views matched my appearance. In Australia, where I had grown up and completed my undergraduate degree, I was involved in the protest movement against the war in Vietnam and for the right to abortion. But here's the surprising thing. When I went to Oxford, I had never thought about the way we treat animals. I ate meat. Everyone I knew ate meat. It's hard to believe today, but I was 24, and I don't think I had ever met a vegetarian. I'd certainly never had a serious discussion with one about the ethics of eating meat. I didn't regard the treatment of animals as a serious political issue. That all changed when, by chance, I had lunch with a Canadian philosophy student, also in Oxford, Richard Keshen. Here I am with him many years later. When we had to choose what to eat, there was either spaghetti with a sauce on top of it or a plate of salad. Richard asked if the sauce on the spaghetti had meat in it, and when he was told that it did, he took the salad. I took the spaghetti, but then I asked him why he was avoiding meat, and he told me that he was a vegetarian because he didn't think it was right to treat animals the way they were treated before being turned into meat. I knew, of course, that the animals I'd been eating all my life were slaughtered, but I thought, until that day, they had good lives, grazing out in the fields. No, Richard told me, that isn't true. Many animals were no longer outside. They were confined inside buildings, very crowded, all to make them grow faster and to produce meat more cheaply. I wasn't sure at first whether to believe this, so I began investigating modern farming methods. I found that Richard had not exaggerated at all. It was much worse than I'd imagined. Let me show you just 4 slides of how most of the animals people eat nowadays live. First, veal calves, kept all their lives in these wooden stalls, unable to walk or even turn around. Next, pigs in a huge shed, highly intelligent animals in a prison, nothing to do all day. Now, here are egg-laying hens crammed into small wire cages, no opportunity to build a nest or spread their wings even, or walk freely. And then chickens raised for meat, which Professor John Webster, the founder of one of the world's major centres for the study of farm animal welfare, has described as the single most severe systematic example of man's inhumanity to another sentient animal. Learning how these animals, which I was then eating, had lived, led me to think about the ethics of how we treat animals. And then 5 years later, to the publication of Animal Liberation, which you see here in its first edition, published in 1975. In that book, I called for an end to speciesism, which I described like this. The term is intended to suggest a parallel between the attitudes of humans to animals and the other isms that we now reject, like racism and sexism. In each of these cases, there's a group that has power over others and wants to use them, wants to control them. To justify this, the dominant group develops an ideology which it believes gives it a right to dominate them. In the Western tradition, for instance, people of African descent were seen as inferior, as needing to be saved by being made Christians, and women were regarded as the weaker sex and in need of the protection and care of males. With animals, there was an explicit appeal to the Bible, with its account of God giving us dominion over the animals. And also, of course, there were false ideas from philosophers like Descartes and Kant, suggesting either that animals are not conscious and do not even feel pain, or that because they're not self-conscious, they're merely means to our ends, not ends in themselves. In contrast to these false defences of our right to use animals, I proposed the principle of equal consideration of similar interests. And I argued that for everyone who is able to nourish themselves adequately without eating meat, a first step towards reducing the suffering of animals is to stop eating them. Now, at first, this idea was ridiculed. People assumed that if I was concerned about animals, I must be thinking of dogs and cats. Surely not the animals we eat. Gradually, though, the idea that we should consider all animals spread. And now, more and more people are becoming vegetarian and even vegan. Animal liberation was published in many countries, including, of course, South Korea. In addition, there were many countries, especially in the European Union, but also in some parts of the United States, like California, that banned some of the ways of keeping animals that I showed you a moment ago. I was very pleased when President Moon instructed Korean government officials recently to consider a ban on eating dogs. I'm sure that many of you already know that if there's one bad thing that people in Western countries are likely to believe about Koreans, it is that they eat dogs. Of course, I know that not all Koreans eat dogs, and as I've already said, I object not only to eating dogs, but to eating cows, pigs, and chickens too. Nevertheless, photos like this damage the reputation of the whole country among dog lovers, of whom there are many millions worldwide. I can draw a lesson from my experience with trying to change people's ideas about animals. If you think something is wrong and needs to be changed, don't give up just because other people scoff at you. Try harder to get them to see it as you see it. Talk to others about it. Get more information. Join with other people who think like you, and always be calm and reasonable. In the long run, that's the best way to persuade people. There are, of course, many other problems in the world today. We're still battling the COVID-19 pandemic. But now that we've seen how disastrous such pandemics can be, we should focus on reducing the risk of the next pandemic, which could be even worse. The Centers for Disease Control in the United States say that 3 out of every 4 new or emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. And the biggest risk is from the intensive farms that, as we've seen, confine tens of thousands of animals in a single shed, thus creating the ideal conditions for the creation and spread of new viruses, which will then be carried by the farm labourers from the animals to the whole world. Let's stop these farms. They are cruel, they are wasteful, and they are dangerous. Raising so many animals for food also makes a big contribution to climate change, which is probably the gravest problem the world faces today, even more serious than the pandemic. Climate change is already here. It's causing intense heat and drought, wildfires, hurricanes, rising sea levels, and floods. This will only get worse over our children's lifetimes and our grandchildren's lifetimes. Every political leader, but especially those of industrialized nations, needs to take strong action to mitigate the damage. But to do that, the electorate also needs to be enlightened. The people who will suffer most from climate change are not yet born, so they can't vote in the next round of elections. Yet their interests should get as much weight, discounting only for uncertainty, as we give to the present adult generation who can vote. For that to be possible, we must have enlightened voters who will only support politicians if they take a long-term view. Finally, all of us fortunate enough to live comfortable lives with enough money to meet our needs should think about those who, through no fault of their own, are among the approximately 800 million people living in extreme poverty, which the World Bank defines as living on less than $2 US per day. Only 26 years ago, South Korea was itself receiving development aid. Today is a donor, though not yet an especially generous one. Here's a graph. You can see that South Korea's official development assistance comes to only 0.15% of its gross domestic income, compared with the UN target of 0.7%. Admittedly, there are other countries, perhaps wealthier than South Korea, that give hardly any more than South Korea. Both the United States, where I'm living now, and Australia, where I'm from, are in that category. But I hope that now that South Korea is so prominent all over the world in fields such as music, film, and television, it will also become more generous, and by getting closer to that UN target, set a better example. Meanwhile, however, you do not have to wait for your government to do the right thing. You can give yourself. Surely, you don't want to be parasites. To help people sort out the best charities to give to, I founded a charity called The Life You Can Save. Take a look at our website, thelifeyoucansave.org. We are trying to direct money to the most effective charities, independently assessed, working to reduce extreme poverty in the world's least developed countries, and you can find details about them on our website. What then would I like you to take away from this short talk? First, to think for yourself and use your precious ability to reason to form your own ideas. Don't just follow the crowd or agree with whatever is fashionable or popular. Ask yourself, is it right? And if it is right, then make that part of the way you live. Bring your values and your lifestyle into harmony. Secondly, broaden your horizons. Don't think only about yourself, your family and friends, or even your fellow Koreans, your fellow citizens, your fellow humans, but about the whole world. Not just the present world, but the future of this world, of our planet, and everyone on it, for the next century and for centuries to come. And of course, for all the sentient beings on it. Join with others to vote for political leaders who also have this enlightened vision. Kamsahamnida.